Hello, everybody. My name is James Michael Nichols, and I am the editor of HuffPost Queer Voices. Welcome to Build. I am joined today by my friend Sarah McBride, who is the National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign, as well as the first openly transgender person to speak at a national political convention of a major party. And today, Sarah is celebrating the release of her memoir, Tomorrow Will Be Different. Congratulations, Sarah.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to celebrate with you all.
I know. We were joking backstage that we have corresponded for years, but this is the first face-to-face meeting, so it's a real treat for me.
I love it. I'm so excited to meet you in person finally.
I know. So, I read the book, and I really enjoyed it. It was extremely powerful. And, one thing I kept coming back to as I was reading it was, it's an extremely brave undertaking, not just the things you go through, but in the choice to be as vulnerable as you are throughout the book. And so the memoir starts out with you coming out as trans while you are student body president of American University. Can you kind of walk us through your headspace at the beginnings of your kind of coming out experience?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. Everyone's journey to coming out as transgender is different. For me, I've known that I'm transgender my entire life. I think it's difficult for folks who aren't transgender to really wrap their mind around the feeling of having a gender identity that differs from your sex assigned at birth. But for me, it felt like a constant feeling of homesickness, an unwavering ache in the pit of my stomach that would only go away when I could be seen and affirmed as myself. And for a long time, I kept it inside. I rationalized that by making my family proud, by making change in the world, that those things would somehow bring me wholeness and completeness. But by the age of 21, when I was at American University and serving as student body president, it became abundantly clear to me that I was watching my one life pass by without actually living it as myself. So I came out to my parents on Christmas Day in 2011. I totally ruined Christmas. And they met my news with fear, but with support. They were so scared that I'd face rejection in every sense of the word. And over the next 4 or 5 months, I came out to more and more friends and family members. And then on the last day of my term as student body president, I decided that I would come out publicly. I was really scared about the reaction from the university community. I knew it was an inclusive, progressive campus, but I didn't know how they'd respond to having a transgender student body president. But the response I got was so overwhelmingly positive that it demonstrated to me that when we tell our stories, when we're vulnerable publicly, that's something that can transcend ideology, it can transcend gender, race, religion, geography. And I think it allows people to enter into a story and experience that they may have a difficult time empathizing with.
Yeah, I mean, coming out publicly, it's such a vulnerable experience, and you're really kind of putting yourself out there for the world, especially as a public figure. And, I would love to hear you talk a bit about the fact that you were the first openly trans White House intern as well, which kind of followed this initial part of your coming out story. What did it mean to you to be the first openly trans intern at the White House?
It was more than anything else a responsibility. I think what was clear to me as I was walking into that space was that no one quite like me had ever walked into that space, not just as a visitor, but as someone who was going in and day out to work there. And the Obama administration was obviously incredibly supportive of LGBTQ equality and trans equality in their first term. But there was an initial sort of cautiousness in their approach to trans issues because, like so many other Americans, a lot of people in the Obama White House and the Obama administration had never really known someone who was transgender. So I understood that in walking those halls and in sitting across from them in conference rooms and getting coffee with them, that it would become more difficult for my challenges and the challenges of the transgender community to remain abstract to them. And we know when you can put a name and a face to an issue, it humanizes that issue, it changes the way you think about it, and it brings a level of passion that maybe you hadn't felt before.
Yeah, and that blending of personal and political really is at the heart of this book, and it kind of carries it all the way through in a really striking way. And it struck me also that a lot of this book seems to be a really kind of basic kind of trans 101 for the general public told through your personal experience. And a huge part of that is your partner, Andy, who you tragically lost to cancer at the age of 24. Can you talk to us a bit about your relationship with Andy and how it shaped the activist and the person that you are today?
Well, I consider myself so lucky to have had the time that I had with Andy. We met shortly after I came out at a reception for the LGBTQ community, and he reached out to me about 2 months later, asking me out on a date. And I fell for him pretty quickly. He was so kind and so funny and brilliant, and just the type of, he wouldn't want me to canonize him, he wouldn't want me to pretend that he was perfect, but he was truly the best person that I've ever met in my life. And he taught me a number of different things. One, he taught me how to live the values I fight for at work in my own life. He taught me that we need to be principled in the way that we fight for equality in our approach to politics, that there are certain principles that we should never violate, and that includes outing people, that includes betraying anyone's ability to pursue their life to the fullest. But he also, in his passing, he was diagnosed with cancer shortly after we started dating. He initially got a clean bill of health, and then about 7 months later, he got the news that every patient fears. His cancer was back, it had spread, and it was terminal. And so I talk about the last month of his life in this book, and watching this young transgender individual watch their life begin to fade away. And knowing that Andy, even though he had come out at a relatively young age, he had come out in college, he was about 3 years older than me, he was supposed to have 3/4 of his life as his authentic self. But because of cancer, because of circumstances outside of his control, he had less than a quarter. And some people have even less time than that. And so for me, what my relationship and his passing taught me in my work as an advocate is that truly change cannot come fast enough. That every single day matters when it comes to building a world where every person can live their life to the fullest. And Dr. King called it the fierce urgency of now. And I try to carry that sense of urgency with me in all of the work that I do.
Yeah, I feel like so much of the fight for equality that we've seen is rooted in this rhetoric, or used to be rooted in this rhetoric of like, we'll deal with this now and we'll get to the rest of it later. We'll deal with marriage rights now, but we'll get to trans people later. And that's why so much of the work that you did, especially in your home state of Delaware, was so crucial. A really powerful part of the book for me was the portion dedicated to your fight for non-discrimination protections for trans people in Delaware. And Andy and your family were all an intimate part of that experience for you. What is it about the political process that excites you so much? And can you kind of take us back to, being on the ground and really fighting back in, I think it was 2013 in Delaware?
Well, I think what excites me about politics, and this is true from my youngest memories reading about the presidents and learning about history, is that politics for me was always about fixing society so that other people, even if I couldn't, so that other people could live their authentic lives. And I think in many ways, politics and advocacy at its best, we oftentimes hear it's that politics is the art of the possible. But I think that politics at its best is the art of making the impossible possible. And I think that that's what we've done as an LGBTQ community, is that time and time again we have transformed impossibility into possibility into reality. And if we've done it before, that means we can do it again. I think people don't fully, though, realize just how difficult it can be when you're fighting for your own dignity, when you're fighting for your right just to be seen and respected as who you are, how oftentimes dehumanizing that can be, how demoralizing it can be to have to go into a legislature day in and day out and explain to people that you are first and foremost a human being, right? To remind people about your own humanity and the fact that you love and laugh, hope and fear, dream and cry just like everyone else. And so that was a difficult process. And I remember watching my parents testify before the Delaware legislature and feeling so guilty, as proud as I was of them, but feeling so guilty that they had to go before our state and almost plead with them and tell them that I'm a good person, like I had committed a crime or something like that. And it was truly really difficult. But it also underscored for me something that I've learned, which is that hope only makes sense in the face of hardship. And being able to weather that storm, being able to get through that and eventually convince enough legislators that transgender people like me deserve equal rights, it was one of the most hopeful experiences and empowering experiences of my life.
Yeah, let's talk about your family a little bit more because your parents are really a central part of this book as well, from your early coming out days to them being on the floor of the Democratic National Convention when you give that speech. And they seem to, as a lot of parents hopefully do after their kids come out, kind of grow and evolve with you as time passes. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and just like what it means to be supported by your parents, especially as a public figure and someone fighting so adamantly for trans rights in the way that you are?
Well, as I say in the book, I lucked out in the parent lottery. My parents are incredibly kind and compassionate people. And I knew from the start that they would love me and support me. I also knew that it would be very difficult for them. I had read that one of the common responses from parents when a transgender child comes out is a feeling of loss or death. And for a while, I watched my parents sort of mourn what they felt like was a passing. And it took my brother, who's a radiation oncologist up here in New York, to come down and say to my mom, I work with kids every day who are dying from cancer. Your child is not going anywhere. Your child is not dying. And I think it helped snap my mother out of that sort of fog. And my parents were able to move forward. But my mom, when I first came out, my oldest brother is gay. And my mother said to my brother, what are the chances that I have a gay son and a transgender child? And my hope when I came out was that she would be able to ask that question not from a place of sort of self-pity, but a place of pride. Pride in the fact that they had raised children who were brave and courageous enough to live their truth, a family that was enhanced in our beauty by our diversity. And I'm lucky to say, and I'm fortunate to say, that they've gotten to that place. But for so many transgender people, that's not a reality. As many as 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ, and in many cases, that's because of family rejection and families not accepting them.
There's another really powerful moment in the book. I'm from North Carolina, and so your commentary on North Carolina and HB2 hits close to home for me. But there was this viral selfie that you took in a woman's bathroom in North Carolina that you kind of offhandedly took, and then it went crazy viral after you got on an airplane and really rocketed you into the mainstream conversation surrounding all of this in a lot of ways. But you also experienced a lot of bullying and harassment from that viral selfie. Can you talk to me a bit about kind of the biggest lessons you learned as a public-facing advocate from that experience?
You know, after I took this selfie, I knew how viscerally angry it makes some people for transgender people to be able to continue to access restrooms without fear of discrimination, but I didn't truly realize it until that selfie, when my social media was just flooded with harassment, people talking about telling me to kill myself, people threatening my physical safety, threatening to kill me. And you know, afterwards, there was a period of time where I wondered whether I could continue doing this work, because I really took a lot of those comments and I took them to heart, particularly when they were really directed at me in very specific ways. And I worried that I wouldn't be able to continue to do this work. And so I did a lot of research and I did a lot of writing and I reflected on this a lot. And one of the things that I finally sort of came away with that is a simple realization, but it allowed me to continue to put one foot in front of the other, is that everyone deals with an insecurity. Everyone deals with something that society has told them they should be ashamed of. Whether it's your gender identity, your sexual orientation, whether it's how you look, how you sound, what you do, where you come from, everyone deals with something that they are mocked for. And oftentimes, LGBTQ people, in accepting this fact about ourselves and in coming out, we have taken that thing that society has told us we should be ashamed of, we've accepted it, and in many cases, we've moved forward with pride in that identity. And the bullies, they see that. They see that individual agency, they see that power, and they're jealous of it. And so oftentimes, it made me realize that the hate that comes our way is based in this jealousy of the fact that we have conquered some of our biggest fears. And they want to be able to do that too. And so it provided me a little bit of, frankly, empathy for those who were trolling and hating on me, but it also made me realize that not only is my voice powerful, but that I'm powerful just by being.
Wow. Yeah, those moments are always so much more about what's going on with the person than actually what you're actually engaging in yourself. Yeah, that was very beautiful. I guess let's have one more question, then I'll toss it to the audience. You know, this speech that you gave at the Democratic National Convention, I remember being in the HuffPost newsroom and watching it and just being patently aware that I was witnessing history kind of happening in a lot of ways. And I think that queer and trans people all across the country and around the world felt that when they watched that speech, and it's going to live online for years and years to come. You know, what do you want young trans and gender nonconforming kids who watch that speech to ultimately take away from your words on that day?
I wish I could bottle up the energy and the love that was in that arena, right? It was amazing, I'm sure, for people to be able to see it on television, but in that room, the energy was palpable, and it wasn't about me. No one in that arena really knew who I was, but they understood that this was a moment, and they were standing up and applauding and celebrating our lives. And for so many transgender people, that was one of the first instances they saw a mainstream political entity on that scale saying that your lives matter and your cause is our cause. And so what I always try to remember for myself in these sort of darker political moments, and what I try to impart upon any transgender person, is that, you know, Donald Trump and Mike Pence, they are trying their damnedest to undermine equality and roll back our rights. But what they can't do is they can't close the minds that have been opened and the hearts that have been changed. And at the end of the day, we have an alliance of allies standing with us in unprecedented numbers that are ready to fight with us, that are ready to speak out with us, and who are going to work with us to bend the arc of the moral universe a little bit more towards justice. And no matter the slurs you heard around the dinner table, no matter the taunts you were facing on the playground, those allies see you, they love you, and they're fighting with you.
Well, one last question, because we didn't actually talk about the current political administration. I do want to hit on that. I think it's also important whenever we have conversations like this as public-facing queer people to really think about allies, you know? And so we're clearly under a really specific period of threat in a lot of ways from our government as queer and trans people. What is the best way that someone wants to be an ally to the queer community? You know, how do they go about doing that? What can they engage in their day-to-day lives?
Well, that's a great question. And there are a number of different individual steps that they can take. One, we need people to call or email their representatives, their senators, both at the local, state, and federal level, to support pro-equality legislation and also to speak out against anti-equality legislation, bills like the ones we saw in North Carolina. We need people to call the White House and tell them that they won't stand for discrimination in our military against transgender people. We need people to reach out to their lawmakers and their policymakers. But we also need people to vote. This coming November is a critical election for our community. It's our chance to stop and halt the politics of hate and to elect more candidates that will support equality and dignity for LGBTQ people. And so we need people to show up and vote and to make clear to their elected officials that if they come for the LGBTQ community, we're going to come for them on election day. But I think when it comes to allies beyond sort of the political, the first thing we need allies to do is to listen, right? Come to us with a willingness to grow and evolve. You're going to make mistakes, and that's fine, but be willing to listen and to grow from those mistakes. And I think that's the most important trait an ally can have.
Well said, and I'll second that. All right, questions from the audience.
Hi.
Yeah, hello.
So I see that Joe Biden wrote the foreword for it. How did he get involved with the book, and have you kept in touch with him or any of the other people from the White House administration or the previous administration?
Yeah, so to your second question, one of the great things about working at the White House was I got to meet some incredible folks that were doing really the hard work of our government without, you know, the attention of the president or the vice president. People who what I call true believers, who genuinely believed in that administration, the goals of that administration, and who wanted to spend whatever time they had in that White House making change. And there are folks who I met there that I stay in contact with who are still fighting with us. Joe Biden, actually, I'm from Delaware, and Joe Biden's obviously from Delaware. And I was involved in politics growing up, and I worked for his son, Beau Biden, who obviously passed away from cancer a couple of years ago. I worked for Beau when he ran for Attorney General of the state of Delaware in 2006 and again in 2010, and we became friends. And when I came out, Beau called me immediately and told me that he loved me. He told me that he and Hallie, his wife, would stand beside me, that I was still part of the family. And so after Beau passed and I began writing this book, I thought that there was really no one better than Joe Biden, who in many ways has taken up the legacy of Beau Biden and continued the work of Beau Biden, to be able to write this forward. Because Beau stood with us in Delaware personally. He stood with us when we pushed for the Gender Identity Non-Discrimination Act. And I thought that given the vice president's leadership on LGBTQ issues and given Beau Biden's history, that he'd be the perfect person to write this forward. And I was exceptionally honored when he agreed to do it. And I think it's actually a really moving forward.
Any more questions? Yeah, hi.
Hi. So from hearing you discuss about your experiences, what was your most challenging part to write in the book that you want your readers to relate to the most?
That's a great question. I would say that the most challenging part of this book is the last month of Andy's life, and reliving some of the most traumatic experiences of my own life, serving as his caregiver and being by his side as he grappled with this knowledge that he had terminal cancer. And one of the things in writing this book that I was able to reflect on, as difficult as those moments were, was something my brother, I always quote my brother because he's been sort of a guardian angel through a lot of this journey. My brother said to me, he said, "This is going to be a really difficult time, but look around and take stock in acts of amazing grace that you see around you. Even in tragedy, you can find beauty." And it's sort of a trite saying, but I didn't truly realize just how absolutely transformative that perspective would be in that last month. Seeing our friends organize a wedding for us in 5 days, a beautiful wedding on the rooftop of our building. Having Andy, who by all accounts probably should have passed away several days before the wedding, not just survive, but make it up to our roof and make it through that wedding ceremony. Those were acts of amazing grace. And as difficult as it was to write, it also allowed me in many ways to re-find my hope in this moment, because I will admit, I grew up during the Obama era. I saw his rise, and I felt sort of this potentially sort of false sense of complacency as a country in our march toward equality. And so I was feeling somewhat hopeless after the election. And in writing this and revisiting those challenging memories, it reminded me that what Sean told me, what my brother told me, is still true today, that we can look around and we can see acts of amazing grace no matter how challenging the times. And for me, I think that's one of the lessons I want my readers to take away from this book, which is that even in hardship, even in dark moments, there's still reason for hope. There's still beauty, and there's still incredible acts of amazing grace that are happening around us at all times.
Powerful. One more question?
Hi. So I was wondering, what was the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Well, that's a great question. I sort of just talked a little bit about it with my brother, sort of helping me get through that difficult time with Andy. But I think some other advice that Beau Biden actually gave me that I think in many ways helps me to, in this moment, is he said, when you make plans, life has a way of intervening. And in many ways, I feel like growing up, I had lived my life based on dreams and plans. And after coming out, that lesson that Beau taught me of sort of living in the moment, don't try to make plans. Just focus on what you're doing and what you're doing that's right in front of you. Focus on the moment you're living in and enjoy life, enjoy the work you're doing, and don't think about what comes next. Don't think about the next step in the career. Don't think about whatever long-term goals you have. Just think about that moment and live in the moment. And I think for me, that is advice that I try to live by, and it's advice that I think more people can live by, particularly in this sort of world of social media and 24-hour news where we're constantly jumping from topic to topic of just sort of living in the moment. And that's what I try to do. It's partly a lesson that was reinforced with Andy's passing. But it was a lesson that I think freed me in many ways.
All right, Sarah, I really appreciate your time today. Your memoir, Tomorrow Will Be Different, is out today. Is that correct?
Today.
That's
This
so
is the birthday.
exciting.
We're celebrating.
Congratulations. I'm James Michael Nichols. This has been Build, and we wish you all the best, Sarah.
Thank you so much.